sign a media release.
Oh, well, too bad. That was like the very first bit of audio that got recorded, Richard, so awesome. Yes, I am Aaron, and I am talking about the Microsoft.NET vNext Enterprise Deployment Tool Preview 1, or MDN-FVNEDTP for short. Everyone's got that? Cool. But we're just going to call it K, because, well, apparently that's what they're calling it at the moment is K. It's probably going to change at some point, but yeah, it's a whole. I think at some point we'll probably get a more enterprise-friendly name, but at the moment it's called K. So currently with .NET, we have a lot of big-ass assemblies. You got things like MS Core Lib, system web, system data, system call, system configuration. If you're doing anything with like the WPF of Silverlight, you're probably familiar with presentation core. We've got all these really big assemblies that do heaps of different things. And take system.web, for example. There's so many things that system.web does, from allowing you to actually talk outside of your code to external web servers, and also has all of the web forms code within it. Is that where WCF lives? No, that's it. No, that's elsewhere. But anyway, so we've got these big monolithic assemblies, and that's continuously a pain for when we're writing code. And also, who has ever come across this problem of you want to install the new version of .NET? Oh my god, we're going to actually have to take our production servers offline. So you're still running .NET 2 in production, and it is 2014. Yes, I actually battled with a client a couple of years ago that refused to upgrade from .NET to the initial release. They wouldn't even install a service pack because that involved taking their servers offline. That meant that we couldn't use .NET 3.5, even if we were going to install that in the bin directory, because .NET 3.5 had a minimum requirement of .NET 2 Service Pack 1. So yes, these kinds of things are the kinds of things that are very common from a .NET development point of view. We've got these huge monolithic assemblies that we have to reference because we want to use one or two classes within inside of them. We've got these monolithic frameworks that scare sysadmins when they have to install them, because just a patch release, oh my god, we're going to have to reboot the server and stuff like that, and these are concepts that are foreign to them. So what has been our solution thus far to doing that? So as I said, we've got two problems: big dependencies, and it's really hard to deploy them. Basically have to install them. So our solution is NuGet. And you use NuGet for everything, right? And that's where we've been going recently in .NET. Pretty much all external dependencies that we want to take, if you're not getting them via NuGet, as far as I'm concerned, your dependency probably isn't ever going to get used in my apps, because I've got no way of getting that. So this is all well and good until you start talking about the framework. I mean, the .NET framework, this can solve one of the problems of these monolithic assemblies. We can have them that we can include via external references through NuGet and stuff like that. We can break them down into small components, but we still have this monolithic framework that we have to install, and there is no way around that until now. So this is something that the ASP.NET team have been working on for about 7 or 8 months now, and it's a new approach to the way the .NET framework is built, and they're calling it the KRE. This is the name that they're currently using. Expect it to change because one of the components is KVM, and KVM is it's upset all the Linux people because KVM is a command that they've already got built in, and also virtual keyboards and mice and stuff like that. KVM was apparently a TLA that we already used, and no one thought to look that one up. But the idea of the KRE is that this is equivalent to the .NET runtime that we've got at the moment, so our CLR, so MS Core Lib, system web, like these sorts of things are what would be equivalent to the sorts of things you would find inside of the KRE. And the really interesting thing that they're doing with this is they're making Mono a first-class citizen of this new framework. What that means is that you could build an application that is fully .NET that is then hostable on a LAMP stack. Well, unless you kind of drop the P, because you're really going to have, you're not really using PHP.
A LAMP stack.
Lambda stack. Lambda, yeah. Or you could run it on an OS X machine if you wanted to do your development just with Macs. And so these are the kind of things that they're looking at, is the ability to no longer restrict .NET developers to running just within a Windows environment. So to work with all of this, we have the new tool that is currently called the K Version Manager, or KVM. There's not a particularly good install story to get this at the moment. You clone the repository from GitHub and execute a bat file, which then puts a bunch of stuff in your user folder on your machine, and that's the install process. Like I said, this is the preview 1 of it. So expect there to be a lot of changes before this is kind of production ready. But what you can do with the KRE is you can, so the KVM, is you can use it to manage the versions of the KRE that you've got installed. So you can have multiple versions of the framework installed on your machine, and using some commands, in particular the second one I've got there, KVM use, we can actually switch between the version of the runtime that is currently loaded that we can then execute our code against. How many times have we built apps that it's like, excellent, works on my machine, it works on the dev next to me's machine, let's push it to the CI environment, and it doesn't work there because, oh, that's right, we've updated to the latest service pack release, and we haven't done that onto the next environment. Or we haven't found that until we've hit UAT or production. This that's a problem because like we install things and we've got no way to know that they need to be installed other than making sure we write those in our release notes. Here we can simulate a whole suite of different runtime environments on our machines and then just swap between them with a command, which under the hood all it does is changes our path in Windows to load in the appropriate version, and we're then running against a different version of the .NET framework. So yeah, as I said, we can install multiple ones. We can have we can see what's installed. We can create aliases so we can easily switch between them rather than having to continuously type out 0.1-alpha-build and then a build number. And then finally, there's a KVM upgrade, and this will go out and will download the latest version of the KRE and set that up on your machine. So this is coming from Node or Ruby or any of those other frameworks. This is a fairly common way that you might want to that you work with it. You have these very small transient installs that you can switch between. I think the reason they called it KVM is because that VM is a common convention with a lot of these other non.NET platforms of version managers. Yeah, same commands as RVM, same commands as NVM, which I've seen, or at least some of the implementations of NVM. I think there's similar things for Python and all that kind of stuff. All right, so let's write our very first K application. So here we go. Here is my first K application. It is a .NET app. It has a using of system because I'm writing out to the console. It's a public class called program. It's got a static void main. It's all very exciting. And now if I go K run, I am spinning up my app. I've run it. I've printed it to the console. I've waited for input, and that is done. Very exciting. We can write console apps. Enterprise ready. Yeah. Okay, maybe not, but so that's kind of the really simple look at it. And what you've probably noticed is this isn't Visual Studio, this is Sublime. I've got the C# syntax highlighting turned on, but I haven't actually spun up anything really like seriously Microsofty other than the fact that I'm running Windows. I'm using an alternate text editor, and I used a PowerShell command prompt. I could have used a bash bat command prompt for all that really matters. This is not forcing someone into the this is how you have to write .NET code. This can be run from I could build this in Notepad or anything like that. Write it with the cat command if you really want. So we didn't have a project, well, at least not a project as we used to. There was no something proj file that I had there. if you very quickly looked at the very tiny font that I had, there was a list of folders that I had. There was no prod file there. I wasn't in Visual Studio, so I don't really need Visual Studio, but I mean, I can do all of this sort of stuff today. I mean, I can always just spin up csc.exe from the command line, throw a bunch of files at it, and it will execute those. It will generate me something that I can run, right? So really, what's the difference? The difference here is Roslyn. So hand up who doesn't know what Roslyn is. Okay, a few of you. So Roslyn is the new .NET compilers that have been under development for the last couple of years, and basically they're a compiler as a service. So whereas the csc.exe and I think vbc.exe, those two compilers were originally written in native code, so they're all C++. These new compilers are written in .NET. They take in .NET code, they parse it, they build assemblies, or they build IL, and then they can execute that. They can be, wow, that's a really awesome spelling of assembly.
It's French.
Wow. Okay, so but what was really interesting about this application that I ran, if I jump back to the command line, I do have a bin folder. Have a look in the bin folder. I have a profile folder, and then I have a .prof in there. I think these are kind of artifacts that are the fact that this is a preview build. But there is no assembly. If I run this again and was to put on something like procmon to see what's happening, it's actually never an assembly written out to disk. It's impossible! I just ran a .NET app, but there was no assembly, there was no executable. What happened? It would have been better if it didn't cut off the text at the bottom, but yeah. So what it turned out is when the guys were initially prototyping this concept internally is they found that it was actually faster to compile with Roslyn and keep the stuff in memory than do what we traditionally do, which is compile it, write that out to a DLL, start an app domain, load all the DLLs into the app domain, so read them back off disk. Why did we do that rightly to start with? Because disk I/O is really expensive. And they found that particularly in larger applications, it's faster to never write this stuff to disk. Just compile it every time. It's faster than spinning up the app domain. In really small applications, like the one I've got here, it's not really the case because it's overhead for actually spinning up Roslyn and all that kind of stuff. But for a real world size application, it's faster just to keep this stuff in memory entirely. Don't worry about writing it to disk. So, you're probably at some point going to want an assembly though. It makes sort of sense to build assemblies, particularly from a deployment perspective. So we can still do that. So I will just jump into another demo. So I've got a simple little tic-tac-toe application. It's a really terrible implementation of tic-tac-toe. But it has a game. You give it a board size, and then it has two computer players that play against each other using random numbers until eventually you run out of places to place things on the board, and one player might win. Generally speaking, they don't win because they're just using random numbers to select where they're going. But every now and then, someone wins. But so I was like, okay, cool. I want to use this inside of my my .NET application because it's really awesome. So the K command, which is how we basically execute K against the particular version of the runtime I've got loaded. So this is how I run through the application as I did before. Or I can do something like K build. So what this is doing is this is breaking because I have a missing reference. And I will talk about that in a minute. No, okay, cool. I can't be bothered debugging why that didn't work, but trust me that it can work. So I will go to a different directory and go to console app and K build this one. Oh no, I know why that's not working. Okay, let's just pretend that hasn't happened because there's a point in the talk that I'm about to get to that is relevant to what that happens. But yeah, so I can generate a NuGet package. That's what kbuild does. it generates you a NuGet package. Instead of generating you just a DLL, you will always get a NuGet package. And the reasoning is that everything now is a NuGet package. Everything from the KLR that I'm currently running all the way down to the projects inside your application, they're all NuGet packages. So I can illustrate that if I go to a particular folder. So when you install K, you get a folder in C user username, and then is a KRE folder. So this is where everything gets output to. I have in here bin. So this is KVM, the KVM command that we run that we install initially. And then here are all the versions of the KRE that I've currently got installed. There's at least one a day coming out at the moment from the ASP.NET team. So if I just come into the latest one, you'll see here I have a NuGet package. If I expand this out, here is a lot of really small assemblies that represent a whole bunch of different things, from system, core, console, collections.
System console is the DLL.
Yep.
And one class.
There's a few more around it, but yeah, so yep, everything is now a NuGet package. So we have a lot of really small references. So it makes it easy to target the things that you want to target. Just close those down so we get lost. All right. So that brings me on to why I got those errors when I tried to run the kbuild command, is because there's a sister version of the KRE that is designed to be a much lighter framework. So the KRE is basically the .NET framework as we have it today. It is everything and then some. Whereas the core version of it, it's much more lightweight. It's the way they pitched it at TechEd, and I'm not sure if this is the best way to be pitching it, but they're pitching it as designed for cloud applications. So you're building something on top of, you're building an application that you're going to be deploying up to Azure. You might not need, some things like the imaging
GDI.
stuff. Yeah, you might not, GDI. You might not need that on your server in the cloud. So why do you have to have assemblies that take dependencies on this? Why can't you have much smaller dependencies that don't have this stuff in there that you can selectively opt into, like system.console? The catch to this is you literally get nothing. And I will prove that by swapping into my the core version of the KRE. So I've just got an alias called default, which is the latest version of the KRE that I've got installed. And then at the moment I'm using SVR 50. So that says it's server 50. Or server 5.0, meaning the next version of the framework. If I change that to server core, run that, you'll see that this is all that it does to change between the version of the KRE that you've got loaded, is it just adds that to your path. So now I'm running a different version of the KRE, and if I was to do krun on the console application that we ran before, you'll see that I get some fun errors like predefined type system.string is not imported. The namespace system doesn't exist. System.console doesn't exist. And that is because, as I said, you get nothing out of the box with... Yep. You get nothing with the core version of the KRE. The reason for that, is choice, yeah. So you have to decide what you want to opt into your application. So my application here, I need to use I need to use the console. I need system.console. So I'll add that as a dependency. System.console, and then this is 4000. Trust me on that, because I have done this many times, and that is the version that I want. I want system.console. Now I just have to do, so one limitation of the core version is that it does provide us with this thing called KPM, which is the K package manager. Under the hood, that's just bootstrapping out to NuGet servers. this actually doesn't work on core because it requires system.http HTTP web request, and that stuff hasn't been ported across yet. So we're just going to go kbm use default. We'll switch back to 50 and kbm restore. So here we go. It's now done some dependency resolution. It's gone, okay, you've got the console app, which is what I'm currently working on. Has a dependency on system.console. System.console then has a dependency on MS Core Lib, system, system.core, Microsoft C#. So I've got to go out and get all these dependencies. So now, if I was to switch back to kbm, it's back up here. Now, if I was to krun, now it will eventually work. So there we go. So nothing. You start with nothing. You build up the application. You pick and choose the things you want. Hell, you don't have to use the console that is available from system. You could create your own. You just have to make it match the using and then the usage. So you could create something else that has a DLL, that has a namespace called system, that has inside of that a class called console that has a write line method on it. And you could import that using a dependency, and you have rewritten system.console.
You call that node with edge.
Yes.
Developers.
Yes, golf clap to that one. But yeah, so like I said, it's super lightweight. You build up what you want to be able to build up. So as I keep saying, this has come out of the ASP.NET team. They've been the ones that have really been spearheading this concept. So a lot of the stuff that they've written to date is around ASP.NET. We can still build console apps because you kind of need that for the interface that they're building at the moment. But ultimately, we want to be able to build some ASP.NET apps because web apps are the only thing we need to build anymore. We don't need to care about client-side applications. No one's going to build a WPF app anymore. I think they're working on ideas of doing this in WPF, but I wouldn't be building a WPF app anyway. So this is all open source on GitHub. The reason we know that they've been working on this since November is you can look at the commit history. It starts in November. Kind of cool. It means they've been working up there on GitHub, just in a private repositories since November. It's kind of interesting, I think. It's interesting it's not on Codeplex. So let's jump over to a simple web application. Basic web. And let's just discard the checkout. Yeah. There we go. I don't like the little red numbers telling me things, so get rid of those. Alright, so a basic web application. Nothing in my bin folder except for that prof file that I don't know what it does.
Can you open
I'm sure I can, but I'm not going to. Okay, so here is...
Go on.
No, I'm not deviating from the script that I don't have. This is a super simple web application in ASP.NET vNext. It is very similar to a Katana application. If anyone's played with Owen and Katana or have been to alt.NET last year, I think it was when I talked about that. If not, it's on YouTube. Go back and watch the talk. Awesomes. But what I've done here is I've specified that it's a class called startup inside of a namespace, just called basic web. For a web application, I need to have a class called startup and a public void. Well, I don't know if it has to be void, but a public instant method called configure, which takes an instance of iBuilder. So iBuilder is what we define our routes and anything like that on top of. My package JSON is a little bit different. So a package JSON is kind of like our proj file to a certain degree. I'll talk about proj files later on. But this is where we define our dependencies to our NuGet packages. In this case, I'm using ASP.NET Diagnostics, ASP.NET Hosting, and ASP.NET Server Web Listener. We can define commands. So commands are things that K can execute. K's got a couple of built-in commands like build and run and a few others. But it will also look into this project.json file for any custom commands that we've got. So what I've done here is I've created a custom command called web, which when executed, it will tell the K runtime that the entry point is actually going to be the ASP Microsoft.ASP.NET.hosting. So this is where it will find the program main method to execute. And then it's got some command line arguments that I'll talk about in a moment. So I'll jump down here and K. So if I was to just do K run, this will fall over because, it doesn't find a static main method in any of the classes that are defined in the code base that I've currently got. Whereas if I was to do K run Microsoft.ASP.NET, yep, and then hosting. So this time I'm saying here is your entry point. Wait, was it that or was it? That must be right. Okay, so here it's like, well, I'm not quite sure what to do now because I've told it to. I'm telling it where the entry point is, but it doesn't know where to go next. So what I have to do is, although I'm telling it where the entry point is, I need to tell it what server I'm going to use. So I want to use, this is just a in-process server. I could shell this out to IIS. I could use something like Known, which is a third-party self-hosting server that someone has written. But in this case, I just want to use the ASP.NET Server Web Listener. And then I tell it the collection of URLs that this server is going to be serving on. So in this case, the URL, I'm just defining one, which is localhost of 5001. Now if I run kweb, so running k and then telling it for a custom command, web, and that's then started. And if I go localhost 5001, I've got my ASP.NET welcome page. So the reason I got that was because inside of my code, I said builder is going to use the welcome page, and that's the only route that I've got defined. Go to anything, I will be redirected to this. This is an extension method that is provided as part of the Microsoft.ASP.NET.diagnostics NuGet package, and it's just it starts its life as a Razor file that gets compiled by the Razor compiler into a C# class, which they then just write the HTML out to the response. Okay, so maybe I want to have a custom route. So here I'm using another extension on our builder called mapWhen. So mapWhen takes a function that returns a boolean. So this is, I'm saying, when the request path contains home, I want to do this particular route, otherwise fall through to whatever will be next. So fall back to homepage. So just restart my server. There we go. So I still get, if I go to just slash, I still get that. If I go to /home, I get hello world. So I can start building up routes differently. So this is, it's a full web server. I can define as many custom routes as I want. I've just chosen in this case to use the mapWhen function, but if you go back and look into what you can do with Katana and Owen, you'll understand more concepts about how you could build up routes and stuff like that. Yes, so I did have to restart the server. This is kind of a limitation of the K command line tool at the moment, is you do have to kill the process to restart the server. They're working on making it so you don't have to do that, so you just save the file and it will, behind the scenes, it will terminate the process and restart the compiler and rerun. Kind of like the edit and continue that you get with Node or Ruby or anything like that. You don't have to restart servers to necessarily get all this stuff changed. Unfortunately, at preview 1 level, you've still got to kind of do that. The Lambda statement that I've got, context and then arrow. So the context is the version of the HTTP context that is available inside of this new framework that we've got. we don't have the full HTTP context that you would have been used to with system.web. They realized that the HTTP context that they designed for system.web worked very well for the problems they were trying to solve with web forms and web application development over the last decade, but it's no longer quite the right approach going forward. So this is a much smaller object. You don't have as many properties exposed as you did in the HTTP context. It's not available as a static class to access, like HTTP context.current. It's the kind of thing that's all unit testable and things like that. All right, let's go back to my slides. So other changes that they've done around the ASP.NET side of this is, because this is a breaking change. By no means think that you're just going to be able to take your existing MVC 4 or 5 applications or anything like that and just chuck them on the KRA and have it work. They want to get to a reasonable level of parity where that is a fairly realistic possibility, but it's not quite like that, at least not at the moment. But they've also taken this opportunity to do things like consolidate Web API and MVC together. This is something that was a lot of people were kind of annoyed about when Web API came out, because it had API controller and we already had controller. It had action filters, but they were in a different namespace. It had routes, but they were in a different namespace. You had different route collections. You had different service locators for doing dependency injection, all that kind of stuff. They were two separate things. And part of that was because Web API was designed to be to work on top of Owen, whereas MVC was designed to work on top of system.web. Because this is now a breaking change, they've been able to take that opportunity to consolidate these into a single entry point. So we just, like, MVC and Web API are now a whole lot more interchangeable. System.web as we know it will not exist. You will not have web forms, at least not in the core version of the KLR. As certain people that might not agree with Richard's slow clap there, but yeah, web forms is definitely not going to be something that will be available, at least on the core, as far as they've said so far, and I don't expect that to change. They've also taken another step to make dependency injection even more prominent than it has previously been in ASP.NET, MVC, and Web API. It's been there, it's reasonably prominent, but you've still had to always go out and find your own container. Even if you just want to do something very simple with dependency injection, you've still got to go install something like AutoFac or StructureMap or Ninject or any of the other containers out there. There is now a reasonable IOC container that is just baked into it, as long as you opt into that NuGet package. Obviously, you're still going to have to ensure that you're opting into that if you want to use their container, but it's kind of there from the get-go. It's just their own IOC container. It's not it's something that they've written specifically for this. They want to have easy interoperability with existing IOC containers like AutoFac, Inject, etc. But at the moment, they're not there. And preview 1, people. Preview 1. Okay, so let's have a look at an MVC application. So I've got my dependencies here. The only thing I've changed in this is that I've added a dependency on ASP.NET MVC. I've also copy and pasted this from someone else, so I have dependencies on runtime and data annotations. I actually don't think I'm using them, but I have them defined anyway. And I still have my startup. And this is where we start seeing the dependency injection already coming into play. So I've pulled in Microsoft Framework Dependency Injection. I think that's actually a reference that gets included as a dependency via the MVC. You don't have to explicitly include that, but if you wanted to use their IOC stuff but not MVC, you would then just take a dependency on the NuGet package, and it gives me this method on the builder object called useServices. So this is where I would define any IOC things I want exposed via IOC. In this case, I'm saying that this one particular service I want to use MVC. MVC is a service. Web API would be a service. If I was loading up an EF instance, I would then have I've defined Entity Framework as a service that is available, all those kinds of things. I then tell the builder that I want to use MVC, and I've also included error and welcome pages just as kind of fallbacks on either side. What's really interesting is that you actually have to opt in to having error pages. There's no white slots anymore. You won't. That was actually baked really deep inside of system.web. If you don't include the Microsoft.ASP.NET.Diagnostics NuGet package, you actually don't get the concept of a white slot. You have to write that yourself. So you can make it look however you want. Question?
What do you have to go add in and use
Why have I got add MVC and use MVC? Yes. I'm sure that there's a very good reason why you've got to do that. I don't know what it is. I think it is to do with so add says like boots up like control factories and stuff like that, whereas use sets up some default routes, so it does like the / controller action, and that maps to home index by default, so you don't have to define your route. So that's the kind of stuff that happens inside of use MVC. This is just a very basic MVC controller. It's slightly different. I'm using iActionResult as my response, not ActionResult. So the action results are now interfaces instead of a base class. I'm not particularly sure of the reasoning behind that. But there's testability, really, because it was like the action result wasn't exactly tied to anything that was hard to test. But yeah, there's dependency injection and all that is the reasoning behind it, I'm sure. And then very exciting Razor file that has a very exciting shared layout file. Exciting. So I mean, this just looks like MVC as we've seen it today. And if I kill that server, and then web. I think I ran this on the same port. Yep. There we go. So that's our that's gone through an MVC controller pipeline. We've got home controller. It's been mapped to a controller action, which has then been mapped through to a particular view because I've done a view response. All those kinds of interesting things. We'll go back to slides. So I can't remember. Okay, so configuration. One thing you will have not noticed because I didn't point it out and the screen's kind of small is there was no web config. I didn't have a web config in either of the web examples that I've got. If I am running this self-hosted, but even if I was running this through IIS, you don't have a web config in the same manner that we have before, because really config contains values that you might want to be injecting as dependencies. Like they're dependencies on your code base. So you might want other ways that you could get these. What if you wanted to store your config inside of a JSON file or an ini file? I don't actually know why the ini file exists, other than probably someone on the team thought that was for the lols of it. But other things that you could do with configuration, this is something they do a lot of in the node world, is set environment variables or setting variables on the node process before execution that gives you information about where you're running. Say you're running this application on your machine, but then you want to push it up to Azure. You might want to know that you're running in a production environment and you want to have something different happens. Well, traditionally we would have done a web config transform, we would have changed something in there, we might have done a whole bunch of other stuff. But what if we just had part of our configuration object understood the difference between environments that we're working on? Or what if we wanted to have configuration that wasn't just tied to one single location, wasn't just in one file? We wanted to get it from multiple locations. Someone actually told me that I should be using the full Spanish version instead of the English translation, and I'm not going to read Spanish. Yes, why not have both? If anyone hasn't seen the old El Paso ad, that's what it's from. Okay, so Let's close off this project, and I will come over to more MVC. So here I'm actually saying that I've got config values that are going to be in a JSON file, but I also want some config values that might be provided from the environment variables. And there could be multiple ways that I get my config information. And this is all cascading, so that I could say that, well, first off, look in like Azure Blob Store. There might be a config file in there. If you can't get the value from there, look at the next level down, which might be a locally stored JSON file. If you still can't find it there, check for an ini file, check for an in-memory store, and fall back to command line arguments, fall back to environment variables. So rather than having this one location where we've got to get all of our config information from, we can split this out over multiple files, over multiple file types that represent, file types that are best used to represent the data that config values are represented as. XML could be useful for some things, but not for others. I saw someone tweeting the other day going, would it be kind of cool if we could just load them up as actual C# classes? Your config is just a C# class that you're loading up. And all the configuration stuff is done by this iConfiguration class. I think it's the iConfiguration interface. It might be another sister one to that. And you just implement that, and it's basically got a get, a set, a try get, and I think a persist. So you've got different ways you can read all this stuff out. So let me just jump over and start this one up. Let me just check out those changes. All right. Okay, web. Start that up. And this is how we would register something on line 18 as a dependency that is in our, it's injectable into our constructors or anything like that. So I just say add an instance. The instance will be resolvable by iConfiguration, and here's the instance that I want you to use. It's got built-in for scopes, so you can have different scopes. By default, things are request scoped, but you can create your own scopes on the fly. You can create singletons, and you can create instance per dependency. So if you want to get something, get new instances every time you request a dependency, those three primary concepts are built in. Yeah, so it's like any other IOC container. It's nowhere near as advanced as the things you can do with auto factor wins or anything like that, but for a good percentage of the IOC problems you're solving, you're probably going to be okay with what's available out of the box. Yep. Okay, so config and then index. Okay, so I've created a controller that has just output something. I haven't specified an environment. It's interesting. I'll have a look at that in a moment. And then it's just put out some crap at the end that came out of a config file. So let's have a look at my controller. Just terminate the server. Let's have a look at the controller. So it's an MVC. Wait, no, it's not. There's no control. Wait, hang on a second. I'm actually not inheriting from controller here, am I? This is just a class. But it was routed as though it was a web request. It's got an index on it. This is controllers by convention, another thing that they've added as this new version of MVC. You no longer have to inherit from the controller base class. There's some reasons that you want to do that. I'll talk about those in a moment, but you don't have to do that. I have done my iConfiguration is something that is to a constructor of this. I'm assigning it to a private variable, but I haven't had to set up controller factories or anything like that. It's just wired that stuff up for me. And then from my config, I've said config get name, config get environment, and then I've got something really nested. So let's come to my app data. Config.json. It has a name property, which matches that first call. Don't have an environment defined here because this config file, I don't want to transform this per environment. This config file is just like my system level configs. Environment, which environment I'm running on, that's coming from elsewhere. And then I can nest things inside of my config. So in this case, a JSON object I've got quite deeply nested. and it just supports that out of the box that I do property colon property colon property, and your implementation will then translate that down to how you want to read that out. So obviously turns that into dot notation inside of a JSON file. If this was XML, an XML config, it might be an XPath expression, something like that. So let's have a look at how we could get that environment set up. Set end equals dev. And now I will k web. Start that up. Okay, cool. So server started. Reload. There we go. Now I have just read an environment variable through my config without having to change my code base. So I can change that environment variable. I could actually update my JSON file to specify the environment if I really wanted. But this is stuff that hasn't had to have compile time changes done. This is all conventions. That it just builds that sort of stuff up. Get that one running. So a final interesting thing that yes, so this kind of stuff would be really useful for Azure. So you don't have to transform configs. You can read stuff out of Azure storage itself, or your own local version. You might have that stored in something that's available on your machine, so you don't have to put passwords for your SQL Server inside of your source control. All right. So I now have another controller here. This is just an API controller. And I want to return some JSON or some content here, but I haven't made an inherit from controller. Instead, I have taken a dependency on action result helper and on action context. So action result helper is what is used to write out JSON, or it's what's used to write out a view if you're doing MVC, anything like that. But I could always create my own implementation of this. If I don't like the fact that it's using Newtonsoft JSON as the JSON to .NET serializer, I could import my own. I could write my own implementation if I really wanted to, and then bootstrap that through dependency injection. But the cool thing here is that I now have something that I can expose as send down a result. I can send down this result, and it says that it's going to come down as JSON, or I can send down content. I don't know why I've got that context in there. I think that was something I was playing around with earlier, but it didn't work. So, but under the hood, if I was to inherit from controller and do return view or return JSON, all it does internally is it does action result helper.json. So I can do that my own way if I really wanted to. Yeah, so it's got all the same conventions in Web API of get, post, put, and whatnot. I think that there's some limitations around attribute-based routing at the moment. I don't know if they've ported that. I saw a comment in a file the other day that said it wasn't there. Do you have a question, Bob?
You have to specify the text as well, like the content negotiation is not implemented.
Yeah, so in the content response, you have to specify the content type when I'm doing the result.content. That's just the method signature. I think if I don't specify content text plain, just like put empty string, it just does text plain anyway. I don't think it's doing content negotiation at the moment though. I think that is something else you'd probably have to opt into. At the moment, I haven't opted into anything that would give me content negotiation. All right, so back to our slides. I think there's only 9 more slides left. So, content negotiation. Possibly.
Yeah. Serialize it to do JSON or XML serialization function.
That's a bit different between MVC and running code. I'm just wondering if by combining it, we are losing something.
Yeah. Okay, so does everyone know that you can debug through the ASP.NET source code today? If you set up some references, you turn off just my code debugging, you can do a bunch of stuff like that. I'm not going to talk about how you can do that because I've always found it to be a bit of a pain to set up. But imagine if you could just say that, oh, I've got a reference to this NuGet package, but here's the source code for it. I've cloned the Git repository for that. Just use that. I want to see what happens when I go through that. Well, it turns out that we can do that. I can't remember what image or what slide comes next, so I'm not going to go next slide, because if it's the next, this is the one that I think comes next, I don't want to spoil the surprise. Okay, let's go to one that I have created earlier. And so in our more MVC application here, I'm not doing anything different. I just want to, a bunch of exciting stuff that happens here. Or was it? Shit, which one did I do it in? It was this one. Yes. So I decided that I've got a convention. I don't like the word index, so I've decided that all my default route should be indux. But to do that, I have to define my custom routes. I override all that stuff. It'd be cool if I could just change the MVC source code so it did that. I can pull that down from Codeplex. I can modify it. I can compile it. I can then host it in my own personal NuGet server, and I can do all that kind of stuff and go, yay! I feel really good about it. But it's still kind of like that's sort of overhead. What would be really cool is if I could just change it and just my machine sort of like the runtime works it out for me. Because I've got my dependency here that says that I'm using ASP.NET MVC and I've got a particular version here. Well, it should be fine, right? So the thing I've done is I've added this file at the root of my directory, so where my solution file would normally have existed, called global.json. And I've said, some sources, you'll find some sources at this location here. So I've actually cloned ASP.NET MVC into that location, then /sources to where the actual source code of it exists. And now if I just go project, add folder, there it is, MVC, just leave it, it's the full MVC folder. Come down, source, here, running out of screen space, here, builder extensions. So, here is, so this is that use MVC method that I asked about earlier, Pavel, that it sets all that kind of stuff up. And it's the end of this line. So here we go. On line 17, so the default is controller, and the default action is going to be indux. Yeah, because I like that word. Now, I haven't compiled anything. I haven't, copied it. I still have no DLLs up my sleeve. Ha 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 ha. I don't have sleeves either, but that's another point. Come back here. Oops. Wait, damn it! No! My demo failed. It's because I'm in the wrong folder. Okay, web. Nearly fail. So web is a custom command that I've created. K just says, you say K, and then I want to execute a command. So the default commands are things like run and build, but in this case, I've defined a custom command called web. It's running self-hosted. Okay, there we go. I am now running a home controller, but with a custom version of MVC. So that has found our indux method on my home controller with my custom view called indux. If I was to rename this view to back to index, there is my equivalent of a Y-side because the view index wasn't found. So I've changed the MVC source without having to do anything other than clone the NuGet repository. Clone the GitHub repository. So that's all that we had to do. So this doesn't have to be just to like the MVC source or anything like that. You can put your own internal applications. They can all be connected to your own internal NuGet server, and that's how you get all your dependencies. But for local dev, you might want to be able to point to the source, so you can add this line in to your global.json file just for those times it's like, okay, well, I've got to fix something in a core library, so I want to change that, but I want to make sure that it works without having to push it to our build server that then gets pushed into our NuGet repository, only to find out that it's broken. So with the Visual Studio support, it loads this up with the project, and you get like full debugger support as well, straight into that. Alrighty.
So you don't have to specify anything. You give it a global folder.
Nope. You just tell it where to find the source, and source will always trump a NuGet resolved dependency. Okay, so that's been like 55 minutes, and like this is how I'm feeling, guys.
Don't stand up.
So that basically wraps up what I was going to talk about for the last 55 minutes. But I do have some pre-canned questions for things that I was expecting people to want to ask. I believe they've said there is still going to be an installable version of the .NET framework going forward. This is just another way. They want to enable people to be able to faster turn around the usage of the .NET framework release. They don't want to have to wait for it to go through all the security tests that the DevOps team thinks is required, because they're better than the thousands of installs that have already happened of the framework by Microsoft. But I'm pretty sure they've said that there is still going to be a way that we can do classic as in GAC deployed .NET version.
That's what they call it, actually.
I don't know. I was writing these slides. I'm like, I need something to call it, so I'm calling it classic.
Call it J so we can have a meeting like that.
When will this be ready? When can I put this in a production environment? Don't expect that for a while. Probably not until at least the end of this year would we expect this to be in production. This is preview 1. There's a lot of pointy edges at the moment. The stuff that we can get access to today, there's no Visual Studio support. I am doing this via command line. That there is a nightly build, or at least once a night there is a build coming out of a new version of the KRE. Things just kind of break, and then things that were broken yesterday are all of a sudden fixed. The guys are really active on GitHub about getting this stuff done. I suppose they're being paid to write this, so they probably have to be a bit active.
Is the whole team working on it? Is it the MVC?
I don't know if the whole team is working on this. Dave Fowler is the lead developer on it, and he is the person. Yeah, he is from Signaler, and he's done most of the commits that I've seen recently. But that's because I'm only subscribed to one of the repositories. Visual Studio support is coming. There will be a proj file, and there will be an SLN file, like we've got for .NET applications today. It will be called kproj, or at least at the moment it will be called kproj, while it is still called the KLR. And the only reason that this file will exist is to enable Visual Studio side of things. You will not need to use a kproj file and an SLN file if you want to build this on Macs, if you want to build this on Linux machines, if you want to build this with Sublime or Notepad or Vim or anything like that. You don't need those files. They're to enable the IDE support. The way they've pitched this at TechEd is that they still want Visual Studio to be the best place to write .NET applications. So they're building tooling, and they'll need file configurations to support that. And that's what kproj and
What's the build server
SLN.
going to do these days?
Spit out a NuGet package. A build server will spit out a NuGet package at the end of the day.
You won't need MS Build.
I don't think you'll need MS Build in the capacity that we've used it today. The Visual Studio support does other things that you can't do from at least the K commands and its sister commands like KVM and stuff like that. I would expect there to be to make Visual Studio the best way to do .NET applications. They'll probably still have things that are really specifically tied to Visual Studio around usage experience, debugging, etc. There's currently no debugging support running it from the command line like this either. That's been a world of fun writing these demos. And as for like really pointy edges, I said at the start that Mono is going to be a first-class citizen for this new version of this new runtime and everything like that. At the moment, they haven't really officially released Mono support. there was a blog post that actually came out I think, last night or this morning by a guy from Redify about how to run this on Mono. It does require you to download the latest commits to Mono and compile that yourself, because there's been some fixes to Mono themselves. Have had to fix a few things to get this working. So it's coming. They've been doing a lot of work around the build scripts recently for KVM and KRE and stuff like that to make it work better on Mono. And yeah, it'll be better. Also, this is something that took me forever to work out why my packages weren't resolving. Is they're pushing all their stuff to MyGet at the moment, so it's not on the official NuGet repository. So you have to have the MyGet repository in a NuGet config somewhere. This either be at the root of the Git repository you're working with inside of. I just chuck mine inside of my users NuGet.config file. But MyGet's also been kind of going down a bit recently. It turns out that when everyone's like, "Oh, new shiny bits," and jumps on and just starts like downloading tens of megabytes of NuGet packages all over the world, they keep crashing MyGet. Whoops. It's been a bit more stable in the last week, but yeah, it's been a bit of fun. KPM, as I said earlier, doesn't work if you're using server core, so you have this kind of nasty switch back and forth between the two. And also, I didn't really talk about the configuration section of the project.json file, but that's just the different versions of the .NET runtime that you work with. So I had net 4.5, so it runs against the .NET 4.5 runtime that I've currently got installed. K10 is the KLR version 1.0 runtime, and I tried to find like the system.console dependency just inside of the K10, and at least in, I think it was 0462, it wasn't resolving that dependency properly, so I had to put them into the top level dependency. So like I said, there's still things that don't quite work as nicely as you would want. What to do now? Hanselman has a blog post about this that has a link to all the TechEd videos. They're really good to watch. Him and Scott Hunter do a very good 101 introduction to this stuff if my 101 wasn't good enough. And then Scott Hanselman and Dave Fowler did a much deeper dive into some of the stuff that you can do, some of the more hardcore things that you can get with it. I've also linked to the TechEd videos. Also, grab go to the GitHub repositories. They've split this out into a dozen or so different GitHub repositories. So if there's like a particular thing you're interested in following the progression of, like the MVC, you want to follow the progression of that, that's just getting committed to its own separate GitHub repository. If you just want to kind of see the overall project, that's ASP.NET/home on GitHub. Subscribe to that. And Dave Fowler in particular is really active in the Jabber chat room for ASP vNext, which is room/ASP.NET vNext. And yeah, they're out there. They're really looking for feedback on this. Me personally, I'm really excited about the direction that they're going with this. Modularity and the ability to not have to worry about waiting for installs, waiting for service packs to be deployed and stuff like that makes it a lot easier to be able to try out new things and roll back very easily if they don't work. Any other questions, or do we just want to nick off? How do you deploy? At the moment, there's currently no real hosting for this. Like I said, you're not running this on a production server anytime soon. So your FTPs, you're doing a git push to a server and then running a bunch of PowerShell scripts to run KE on startup. I've heard people have tried to get it running on Azure websites. Doesn't quite work. You're probably better spinning up an Azure VM or an AWS VM or anything like that. Git push and then and then pull it down yourself and then start it up, or deploying it as a NuGet package to a NuGet server and pulling it down through the server that way.
What's that is running the RIP gag?
Oh, the website.
Yeah, I don't know how they're running RIP gag, whether that's running off this.
You're just talking about the site itself. Yeah, that's downloaded.
Yeah, I don't know if that's running off K or anything like that. Yeah, so the idea is you could just deploy your CS files onto an environment. K starts up, or you would have a hook in to hook it up through IIS. On first request, you start off your compiler. It boots up.
For this would be a bit faster than standard memory footprint as well.
Yeah, so the memory footprint is definitely less because you don't have as big a dependencies that you're loading in. You're being a lot more selective about it. Startup performance is better on larger applications. Really small applications, as I say, it's not great because there's the overhead of Roslyn. But as soon as you're scaling up the size of your code base, which let's be realistic, we're not writing 5-line apps. You've still got to spin that up, and as they get bigger, you don't have disk I/O inside of that. Yes, this is all compile on the fly. There is no DLLs unless you do an explicit build step.
So if your compiled X is greater than 8 gig, you might need to upgrade your RAM.
Yes.
This is all running on what version of the CLI?
Do you mean my demo is running on the same version of the CLR, or so with K bootstraps its own CLR, well, its own KLR, which is the CLR in new environment. The 4.5 config that still does load up the .NET 4.5 assemblies, so that's where it gets its system web, and all that kind of stuff. But the new version, there's a bunch of C++ code that has a tiny thing that it has to bootstrap the initial process into native code, and then the rest of it is just whatever dependencies you define. That's why it didn't have system.object. It didn't have system.string. Those things aren't defined in anything until you opt into them. Well, yeah. Well, Roslyn doesn't have them as included references yet.
Yep. One more question.
When would you not use this? Very good question. Well, obviously, right now you wouldn't use it for anything that's going to production because you've got no way of kind of getting it into production. Also, if you're wanting to work with, this isn't the kind of thing that you'll upgrade all your legacy applications to. There's no point. If you've got a legacy application, you've got an application running on MVC4, it's really no point to upgrade to this new approach. This is kind of more your file new projects, that sort of thing. So where I see myself using this is once it gets to a point where it's stable, I could be confident at least putting this into a staging environment. Any file new project I'd be doing after that, I would be doing this first. There'll be concepts that won't get ported, like web forms. So if you still wanted to do an application and web forms was a requirement for it, so say you're using a CMS like Umbraco or DNN or Kentico, you probably won't be upgrading to this because they still have a lot of web forms relationships, or at least relationships into system.web. So that's kind of the scenario you won't be upgrading to this in. No. This isn't running like LVVM or anything like that. It is still the .NET CLR written in managed code, or a version or an implementation of the CLR written in managed code, which is obviously what they do for Mono. So it is still .NET. It just it's IL that is only ever persisted in memory. All right, I think that's enough. Call it a night.